When it comes to creativity, there are not a lot of hard and fast rules that I think are worth trying to abide by. There's lots of rules that are interesting to know because they can be helpful and you can kind of just take advantage of the fact that certain things already are understood creatively. But a lot of what makes creativity great is making your own rules, establishing something people didn't think would work but then realized does. An aspect of originality is integral to something creative translating, even if it's like a very similar thing to something else. Having said that, I think there are certain questions that are always worth asking yourself about your art. And I'm not saying that you have to ask yourself these questions like before you release something or before you decide you're going to make something or whatever. But I do think that asking yourself these questions will help you to understand your piece, refine your piece, decide what you're doing with your piece, and like whether or not you're really committed to this thing, because making something is a commitment in ways beyond just actually doing the project. There's commitments to having done the project as well, and that's the part that I don't think as many people think about, but we'll get to it. The first thing worth considering is, does this have a soul? Now, probably that's one of the first things you'll figure out about your piece. Probably that's how your piece comes into being, is suddenly the soul of something starts trying to come out of you. You just start giving birth, basically. Some part of your own soul says, I need to go out into the world. I need to be inside of other people's souls too. I need to find a way into their souls. How do you put me into their souls? The soul of this video comes from the fact that I have been struggling for so long as an artist with bridging the gap between how I understand my creativity intellectually and how it actually materializes. And this is especially the case when it comes to music, because in my head, I have lots and lots of sounds. I've collected lots of sounds. What I mean by that is I memorize sounds very easily. So if I hear a song a few times, that song is now inside of my brain, and I can remember it whenever I want. But because I have so many sounds in my brain, they start combining and jumbling together and turning into new sounds. So I've written mentally songs all the time. It's just something that happens. I'm sitting around, all of a sudden something appears in my brain. That is the soul being generated. But then, once you've got the soul there, then you have to start asking yourself a couple of other questions. Now, numbers 2 and 3 of the considerations, it's hard to put one in front of the other. These two things kind of develop simultaneously a lot of the time, but I will be able to best express the difference between them by way of the problems I've had with number 2 as opposed to number 3. So number 2 is, how does it feel? And number 3 is, what does it say? And by that I mean very literally, how does it feel physically? How does it feel emotionally to experience? What does it say emotionally? And also literally, what are the sounds? What are the notes? What are the brush strokes? What is literally being said? But also, how does it feel to experience, to look at it, to literally touch it, or to smell or taste it, or whatever? Where I have always struggled in my music is that I know exactly what the soul of the music is, and I know exactly what it's saying, but I don't know how to make it feel the same way outside of my head as it does inside of my head. And so oftentimes my music becomes about exploring that specific disconnect. Because a lot of the music that's in my head, it just never gets made because I don't know how to make it. And if I try to make it, then it will come out as something else. It will turn into something garbled and different, and I'll end up turning that into something I can use. And so as I realized that there are certain types of music that I could make that did feel good, there are ways I can use my voice that feel good. Because even though I don't really know how to play any instruments, and a lot of the sounds in my head really there's just so much more to sound manipulation than just like knowing how to, like, I don't know, play a guitar. You have to know how to make the guitar sound the way you want the guitar to sound, and also how to capture that into a recording, which is two wholly different worlds. Like, you have to know multiple disciplines to be able to do that, and I didn't know any of that shit when I got into making music. I was just like, why can't I make noises sound good? In the EDM sphere, the world of electronic dance music, how the sound feels is almost all that matters. Usually the songwriting is incredibly generic and repetitive, but the song has a very unique texture to it. And what I mean by that is sound literally manipulates the air. It moves the molecules in the air. And the way that those molecules move changes the way that you feel. You physically are being propulsed by the music. Your atoms are being moved around and jostled. And so EDM focuses on how to get specific reactions out of you through the way that the air moves. Whereas a lot of rock music, for instance, is way more about what are they trying to say, the phraseology of the guitar playing, the structure of the song, not usually nearly as much repetition. There's usually much more thought put into the lyrics, if there are any. And it's not that these things are like tremendously different. These are just tendencies of those genres. There is a lot of rock and metal that like is just recorded like shit and is still beloved by millions and millions, if not like Foo Fighters, right? Like the way that music feels, it's part of the message of it, but it's not like clean. It's not like a very well like manufactured sound to make the air do a very specific thing. It kind of is just pummeling the air full force, and the songwriting is hitting you through your body in such a way that you feel where the song is taking you, but there's no dynamics to the way that it sounds. It's just constantly taking you, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that music doesn't like feel good either. It's very contextual, but like in certain contexts, it like if you're listening like on headphones at a desk, like Foo Fighters isn't the go-to. Maybe in a car, maybe at a concert, maybe blasting out of a shitty speaker on the beach or something. I'm just in my head, it's just playing "Don't Wanna Be Your Monkey," because I can feel the way that song sounds in my head, the way it shakes my body, and even trying to replicate it just there, I was more so trying to replicate the feeling of it than the actual way it sounds, because well, you couldn't. It's like 200 guitar melodies laid over each other, just to create the most how do we make the air shake as hard as possible type sound. So a lot of my music, what I have gone for is to make something that utilizes what can I do. And so a lot of the time, because my voice is kind of like shrill and off-putting, I made music that is shrill and off-putting and thematically approaches those subject matters. And so it's understandable, and I always figured most people wouldn't like my music, but the more I've done it, the more I've been able to express different things with it. And sometimes those expressions fall flat, like the first times I started trying to write like love songs and stuff, I could write some like more complicated or tragic sounding ones, but when I tried to just write like party song, like my voice, my production skills don't reflect that, like if that was something I could do, I would, because it would make me a lot of money, but like I would have to learn how to be that person, essentially, like how to want to hear that. Because when you make music, especially, you listen to the same thing on repeat over and over for hours. As you're mastering and mixing and doing all the different steps, like even just putting together the melodies, especially if it's in a DAW or if you're learning how to play the riffs. And if you're going to play the song live, as part of your life, you're going to hear it billions and billions of times. You have to be ready to hear this song endlessly. So if you're gonna make something that sounds like it's for everybody, you have to also love music that sounds like it's for everybody. And I've made music that some of it's hard for me to listen to because it is more of just a raw emotional expression that wasn't really meant to be heard, and some of it is like, I actually think doing really interesting things with like manipulating the air, which I would say from like the Unknown Tape onwards is where I started to really understand this idea that like part of what music is doing is making you feel the way the music feels. And so up until that point, I had just been rapping on other people's beats. So I was just kind of trying to match the mood of whatever beat I was on with my vocals and my performance. Whereas when I started like really developing my own sound as a producer, I could make sounds that nobody was going to make, that nobody was going to think to make the air feel this way because nobody wanted the air to feel that way. But that's what was comforting to me during those times of like distress. And like, if you listen to something like Weird Year songs by under my name Dronerism, that's pure, how do I make the air change, and like some of the songs have a little bit of the intellectual saying something side, and usually it's in the structure of the song, but there's no lyrics. So in terms of what's being said, much more of that is communicated through how it feels. So again, these two things are very interconnected. How does it feel? What is it saying? And sometimes, literally the words, like hearing them might not feel that distinct, but thinking about them brings on a feeling, So again, there is an interconnectivity here, but the feeling aspect is so much more immediate. It's what hits you right away. You feel it, and then sometimes you think about it, and then you feel it. Sometimes you keep thinking about it, and it keeps bringing back some level of feeling. But the fact, like the understanding hangs in there, and that's the, what is it saying? That's the part that, like, the part of your brain that can remember what the song sounds like, even though you don't literally feel it playing. And even can like kind of mimic that feel. Like you can remember how it feels. You can you have an image in your mind or like a sense in your brain of how it feels, but you can't literally feel it just through thinking about it. That's why these are two different categories. So does it have a soul? How does it feel? What is it saying? Those are the three core tenets really that you should approach when you're just developing the art. If you're just like trying to play with it and have fun with it, and you don't really need to think about the other two things if you're not going to release it. These last two things are considerations if you are going to release this project. There's more to it than finding the soul, finding what it's saying, finding how it feels. All of that's very gratifying for you, and it can be gratifying for the listeners. But if you're releasing it, you're doing something to other people. You're no longer just doing something to yourself. And so the first consideration I'm going to say kind of matters even if you're just doing it to yourself, which is how is this going to affect immediately? And the other consideration, which is much more important if you're going to release it publicly, although it can be important even if not, but we'll get into how is this going to affect indefinitely? Now, the main reason you would have to make these considerations if you were not planning to release the work is that you do, in fact, physically have to complete the work, which may involve more people than just yourself, depending on what kind of project this is. And the more people are involved, the harder it's going to be to not release the work. But even just in a personal sense, I was working on a project last year where I started going deep into the history of Osamu Tezuka. And my plan was to cover like a certain amount before I would ever release anything. And like, as I worked intensively on this project, and I'm going through with like a fine-tooth comb on basically everything that Tezuka ever released, it quickly becomes apparent, like, Tezuka released so much because he was such a workaholic, and he was literally just never doing anything other than drawing manga at the highest speed possible. So he did that for 45 straight years, pretty much. Like, he died at like 60, and he had been drawing since he was like 13, so I don't know, more than 45, almost 50 years of like pretty much constant drawing. And he was always trying to find a way to get away with drawing whatever he wanted. He would cause all kinds of problems for all kinds of people in the effort of getting to draw whatever he wanted all the time, nonstop, until he was dead. And he kind of entered my body. Like his soul entered me as I got lost in his manga and analyzing it and talking about it. And I had this overwhelming feeling that if I let you stay here, you will work me to death, because you never got to express what you were really trying to. He never quite got to live in the world that he created. You know, like he died in 1985, right as anime was really taking hold. And like everything he wanted to do with anime, he could have gotten to do if he had lived long enough. Had he gotten to be 80 years old or 100 years old, you know, he would have gotten to do all the things he was dreaming about because other people got to. But it would have required that all the people who were influenced by him and who were influenced by competing with him had all continued, you know, living alongside him as they did. But like, if not for the fact that his direct people who was most influenced by him, Katsuhiro Otomo, you know, created Akira, if not for the fact that one of the people most influenced by him, Akira Toriyama, created Dragon Ball, then anime would not be where it is today. But he didn't get to live to see that. He didn't see the biggest effects of his influence. And so he never got to use that influence. He never got to do what he truly wanted to because of that. And I think he was so desperate, and I understand that desperation, but he didn't take care of himself like he couldn't have. There's no possible way that he was living in any stretch of the imagination a healthy lifestyle, considering the amount of work he did. And the amount of work it would take even just to, for like a few months, house his spirit enough to like read all of his work and write about it. It was tremendously exhausting. I cannot live the way Tezuka lived for even a little while. It's too much for me. So that's what I mean when I say consider the consequences, both in the short term and the long term, for your health when it comes to creating something. You know, can you afford this in your life? Will this damage your relationships? Will this fuck up your money? Can you really do this right now? Those are important questions. Now we need to talk about if you are releasing it. A lot of the same questions apply, but how is this going to affect other people? What is it going to do to them? What is it going to make them think? What is it going to make them feel? Is it going to make them like you or hate you? Is it going to make them like themselves or hate themselves? Is it going to inspire them? Is it going to make them rip you off? You know, are people really going to understand it? Like, what is the effect in the immediate sense and the lasting sense? What will this mean 5 years from now? Is this going to look dumb if certain things change, you know, in the very near future? Does that matter? Is this meant to last? Is it meant to be temporary, or is it meant to be endlessly revisitable? This video is meant to be endlessly revisitable. In terms of what effect I think this has in the short term, for me, I finally don't have to keep thinking about this anymore. That's the main reason for me to make this video, is that this train of thought keeps re-entering my head. And it started with me wanting to make a video about the difference between how does it feel versus like what is it in your mind, and then me realizing that also there needs to be like a soul that comes from, you know, there's something that is the heart of the matter, because you can just explore making a feeling or, you know, expressing words, but like there is no soul to it. You're just doing it to fuck around. There's no like point, you know. But if there is a point, then that's the holistic factor that, to me, usually is where I feel a project has truly begun. But this was one of those thoughts that even though it kept re-entering my brain, I knew something was missing. Like every time I think about it, I'd be like, I know there's one more thing I have to include. Like I know these are very important things to consider, but I know there's something else that's very important to consider. And yes, it is the immediate and lasting impact of the work. I have put stuff out that in the immediate sense seemed like a great idea, and in the lasting sense, maybe not so much. I don't think Dear Crunchyroll Stop was the best way I could have approached that video. It got me 1 million views in the moment, but it really burned bridges within Crunchyroll, and I was a part of damaging this High Guardian Spice show that ultimately I ended up enjoying. and that I still feel bad that, even if it wasn't just me, obviously I was just joining the dog pile, but that's not something I normally would do. And it was something that was pitched to me because it was a good idea, and I said, fuck it, let's go for it, mostly out of rage towards Crunchyroll for just the way that they are, the impression I'd gotten of them from Crunchyroll Expo. I talked about this in my 15 years of AnyTube video. But like the long-term consequences of that video are that it did help Ray Rodriguez to basically lose a career. Like, he has not been able to pick up a new job as a showrunner. And I watch him struggle on social media, and I'm sitting here like, oh man, like, you clearly deserved a lot better than what you got out of this situation, and it's really not your fault. It's Crunchyroll's fault, but there were more responsible ways I could have made that content that would possibly have helped with this situation for Ray. And maybe it wouldn't have been as successful, and maybe there's really nothing I could have done, but at the very least, I wouldn't have the blood on my hands, of knowing that I contributed to this trans creator basically like losing their opportunities within who I knew nothing about at the time, and now I know about. So that's what I mean when I say you should really think about the long-term consequences. Is this going to fuck up people's careers? Is this going to make people hate me forever? Like, there are doors that are closed for me for all time based on things I said before, because even if I take it back and apologize for it now, A, the damage was already done, and B, like, why should you trust me? I said the other thing before. Why is it now believable? Like, it could be that it takes a very long time for me to re-earn that trust, or it could be that it never comes back. And that's just consequences of having said what you said. So really think about it. What is this going to do for me right now? But also, what is this going to do for me later? Again, this is a video that in the short term, for me, aside from getting the stuff out of my head, will get like, I don't know, a couple thousand views maybe. So it'll make me a few dollars on ad revenue. Maybe somebody will think this is really good advice and they'll shoot me some money on Venmo or Cash App or whatever. Like, I might make a little bit of money off of this video in the short term. In the long term, as long as this sits out there inspiring creative people and it helps them to make something, it could be that, some masterpiece writer is out there telling fucking, I don't know, some late night host about how Trixie the Golden Witch made this video that they watched on YouTube ages ago and that inspired their masterpiece. Or, I go and explained myself how I made a video that showed exactly the thought process that eventually led to my own masterpiece. Who knows? One way or another, the long term of the video is that, it's a positive message. It's hard for me to imagine how this could lead to negative consequences down the line. It feels like a video that almost is automatically positive. So that's at least my hope. I hope you enjoyed it. I've been Trixie the Golden Witch. Find all my links below, and never forget to always remember creativity forever.